when it came to Black History Month here in Spokane, I wanted to do something big because I felt the responsibility of it. You know, just to be frank, I'm the only Black anchor in Spokane, so I felt a lot of weight on my shoulders to represent and to do the city justice. And I was trying to come up with a way to showcase not just Black history, but to showcase some of the current movements that are happening currently here in Spokane. And I got to talking with my assistant news director, Stephanie. And she sent me a bunch of things that other stations had done, and we sat down and started brainstorming. And I was like, well, maybe we'll just sit down and have a conversation. Maybe I'll just invite people into the studio, and we'll just sit down and let's just talk. And that's what we did. And that's what we started. It's a series that I've started called Let's Talk, and it really kind of spurred from an organization that we have within our own station. That's our diversity and inclusion group that's also called Let's Talk. And we sit down together once a month or so and just vent about stories that we've told in the media, vent about the death of Tyree Nichols. We talk about the Coeur d'Alene Pride event. We talk about all of these hard stories that are not only hard for us to tell you all, but that are hard for us to live every single day. And when you think you have to watch the videos, we watch them for 4 hours a day. We watch them, we dig deep into them, we read every national article so that we can best tell you what happened. So we sometimes need to decompress too. And that's what I wanted to do with the Let's Talk that I provided to the community. I wanted other people to be able to have that same kind of vent session, to share what they're going through with the community at large. And so that's what we started. And so we started it this time last year. We're going to show a little clip of it right now, if we can do that real quick. Let's talk. The amount of times that I have been called every name in the book. I mean, I don't know if you ever get used to it, but at some point you get numb to it.
It's really, really hard when you're proud of your job, you're proud to be doing the work that you do, and you wait on people to have a problem with it, because you just know somebody will. Let's talk.
And I started these during Black History Month. We continued them through Asian American Pacific Islander Month. We did it for Pride. We did it for, Indigenous History Month. All of the different months just to make sure that we're talking to people that aren't always represented in majority dominant culture. Because everybody has a story. Every single person in this room has a story that's worth sharing. And that's what we like to do with these Let's Talk pieces. So today, I'm very honored to be on the stage with these three ladies right here. And so the first thing I'm going to let you guys do as you've gotten settled here this afternoon is if you will go ahead and introduce yourselves. If you will say your name and give us your title and just kind of let us know a little bit who you are. It's also our way of getting a mic check from you guys as well.
All right, I'm Professor Angela Schwindeman. I am Assistant Dean of the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences at Eastern Washington University, and I'm also the Director of the Africana Studies program at Eastern Washington University. I've lived in Cheney for 28 years. I've been married to Bryce Schwindeman for 33 years, and we have 9 beautiful children and 7 beautiful granddaughters.
Beautiful. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Dr. Robin Kelly. I'm the Chief Diversity Officer at Gonzaga University, and I've been part of your community since COVID is when I started. So wow. 2 years and 7 months now, so I couldn't even step a foot on campus. And I have a wonderful husband. I call him Kelly because I've always called him Kelly. And we have 3 beautiful children. And I'm just happy to be part of this and participating and just sharing my story as a Black woman in a leadership role and all those different challenges.
Testing, hello. I'm Dr. Jeannie Baines, and I am currently quarterly faculty at Eastern Washington University. That means I'm adjunct. And I'm also the college and the high school coordinator within our department. So I work with schools such as Rogers, Shado Park, and North Central. I live, I'll just say the eastern part of Spokane because I have some negative comments to talk about that eastern part. But I also have 2 grown children. In fact, they decided to leave the area. We listened to Ms. Courtney talk about our youth leaving the area. I have 2 young grandchildren.
I did.
All right, well, thank you so much. So now I'm going to start you off kind of easy. So I know Betsy especially can attest to this. I usually start off with some easier questions, kind of warm you up a little bit before I just like totally throw you off. So, so we're going to start off because talking a little bit about Black history. Obviously, we're here to celebrate Black History Month. So when is the first time that you really remember learning about Black history?
Oh, I remember learning about Black history when I was in elementary school. Back in the 70s, I was in Dunn Elementary School in Rialto, California, which would be the place that Rodney King would actually move to afterwards. When I was there were hardly any African Americans in Rialto, California. We were the only family on the street, on the block, and there were maybe 10 Black kids in the entire school. But they had these old PA systems, and they would play, Dr. Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream. And, I didn't have any context for it, so I didn't understand that this was something that wasn't that long ago. When you're 10 years old and something, let's see, I was born in 1966, he was assassinated in 1968, so I'm listening to this, in third grade. I can remember in second, third grade, not knowing that it'd been less than 10 years, but when you're that age, that's a lifetime. That would have been my lifetime. So I knew it was important, and I developed a sense of pride because of it. And my parents, who are both from Louisiana, Monroe, Louisiana, and they went to high school together, and my dad joined the military, and my mom became a nurse, and she went to an HBCU, Dillard University in New Orleans. And that didn't become significant to me until after I became an adult. And I thought, wow, my parents were a part of this Black history. My mom actually, I wasn't a first generation, and my mom went to an HBCU, and she knew that she didn't want to be a maid. And her dad had his own business. And the reason why my grandfather had his own business, because he was orphaned as a child, and a Jewish family took him in and taught him how to run a business. And so he began his own business. And I didn't realize until I was an adult how significant that was. My parents kept books for us, Jet magazine, Ebony magazine. So I was becoming familiar with Black history. I had an interest in it. Very little of it was in school, but they did have some. And then we moved to Altaloma, California, which is now Rancho Cucamonga, and then we had none.
What about you?
So I grew up in a very different environment. I would say I grew up in a predominantly Black neighborhood, and so it was definitely being raised by a village. But when I was 5 years old, I was bused to a magnet school, so all that whole desegregation thing, and it was kind of like, oh, I see white people, because I never really saw white people. But my first experiences with Black history, and I'm sad to say, was talking about slavery. And, being in a magnet school, and there's a few of us, and the room would get quiet. And then my next experience with Black history and Martin Luther King and peace and love, and he was nonviolent, and pretty much that was I guess who we were in terms of history. And my family was a working class family, so I'm a first generation college student, so we didn't really have conversations in my home about different historical figures. So it was very much, I would say, mentors and teachers when I went to college that I learned more. Like, for example, I didn't know anything about the Tulsa, Oklahoma incident until I was an adult, until I got out of school. And so every year we would have the Martin Luther King Jr. event, or like I said, we would have those moments where we would talk about slavery. And then my only other reference was popular culture, so sports and things like that. But it very much was a on your own experience for me to learn Black history. And so The fact that they don't want anything mentioned, I would argue that it's not enough happening in schools in terms of Black history.
Hello, of course, I'm a little older. So my upbringing, I'm from outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Carnegie, and grew up in a predominantly white environment, small town, but also we had people, family, mentors in the neighborhood who would watch over you. And, you couldn't get in trouble because everybody knew everyone. But also with my family, it was more in the case of stressing education. You have to try twice as hard. They also instilled in us being proud of who we were or who we are. So my introduction to Black history was minimal. We did talk about Harriet Tubman, freeing the slaves. But when I went to college, I graduated from Youngstown State University, predominantly white university, and one of my friends said, "Girl, you've got to go to an HBCU school," because that's all we were used to, exposed to. So I went to an HBCU school, Atlanta University. That was just an eye-opener. While I was in school in Carnegie and at Youngstown State University, there was always a feeling that you had to try twice as hard, and no one encouraged you to go beyond high school or beyond college to get an advanced degree. But once I went to Atlanta University, I don't think I would have been Dr. Jeannie Baines if I had not, I might have, but there was no way that you wouldn't pursue an advanced degree because they instilled in you inspiration to not only learn about Black history, but to gain that education. So in Atlanta, where Dr. King was, who preached and had a church, you learned about his speech and the desire to challenge social justice. So according to Dr. Kelly, when I look at some of the ways we raise our kids, we have to introduce them to the advantages and the importance of learning our history. And that Black history shouldn't only be in February. It should be all through the year. Mm-hmm. Yes. So it starts with our youth. As parents, and I'm sure with you, you raise your kids to learn about the different, our ancestors and some of our heroes in challenging social justice, racism, and so forth. So.
And I'm asking that, the reason I was asking that is because for me, I learned Black history from my parents. My dad grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, and he desegregated his school. He was the first Black kid to step foot in that school. My mom did the exact same thing, little bitty town in East Texas. And for them, both of them, they believed in teaching me everything. So I grew up knowing about Stokely Carmichael. I knew who SNCC was and the difference between them and the SCLC. And I could tell you about Thurgood Marshall and all of these different figures. And it shocked me when I grew up and moved to different parts of the country that other people didn't have that same education. But I realized it wasn't something I learned in school. It wasn't something that I even picked up from books or from anything like that. It was stories that my parents told me and my grandparents told me. And I'm saying that to ask, I think we have this shared thing that we did not learn this in our primary or secondary education, and especially all of you as higher education professionals. What do you think that students here growing up in Spokane are missing from their education? What are some of the things that they aren't learning about Black history or that they should know by the time they get to one of your classrooms?
That's a great question. Actually, since we do have college in the high school, we have some fantastic teachers. I want to shout out to Kendra Edgley over at Rogers, but there are others, okay? And there's some at Lewis and Clark High School as well. What I want to say is we're getting our curriculum into the high schools, which is great. And so this is in accordance with what we are teaching, our African American history from Reconstruction to, the present, those types of courses. It's in accordance with that, and they do a fantastic job. Now, these courses, not all the students take them, but everybody should know them. Everybody should take them. African American history is American history. And it gives, we cannot understand who we are today as a country. We cannot understand the problems and the challenges that we face today without understanding African American history. We talk about institutionalized racism, systemic racism, critical race theory, which in my mind is not controversial. It has been made, it's been politicized to be controversial, but it is not controversial. When you're talking about in 1988, you have law schools that are looking at data. That's what they're looking at, trying to understand why we still have huge disparities in our country so many years after the civil rights movement. And they thought, okay, if we focus on desegregating and opening up housing, and education, that these things, we would see that gap shrink. Why didn't we see that gap shrink significantly? Okay, so all they are doing is looking at data and coming up with some kind of theory or philosophy that helps to explain that. Can't be just because black people aren't trying hard enough or because it's in their DNA and it's genetic. That's inherently racist and biased, right? And there's no evidence to support that. But what they did find is even though we put these, the policies behind that said, okay, that we can't outwardly discriminate, it was still occurring. Okay? That's what they found. That's what critical race theory is all about. Thinking critically about race, looking at the relationship between race, power, and privilege, and how that continues to show up today. All right? So if you have a problem with that, then you need to turn and look inside yourself and ask why you have a problem with that. And what's going on in our high school, you can't even begin to understand that. It should start in our elementary schools, unless you know the history of our country. So this big objection to 1619 is a crying shame because it's the truth. And if you don't understand how it is embedded in the foundations, the very foundations of our institutions, you will not understand why after the Civil War happened, 100 years later, we needed a civil rights movement and why we still need to decolonize our education today.
I do want to give Spokane Public Schools a little credit. They passed the equity resolution and policy, and they are looking at disparities, inequities in the schools. They are also with Kendra Agley at Rogers. We have Ashley Peak at Shadow Park, along with April Aberhart. And we also had Joe Haight, I think his name is, at North Central, introducing introducing either African American history or African American contemporary literature to the students. So when they leave high school and they come out to the universities, they are more inclined to take additional African American courses. So I do want, and Jarrell Haynes, there's a shout out to you too. Thank you.
So I don't have, I guess, deep knowledge about what's going on in Spokane schools, but I could talk a little bit about New York and North Carolina and just in general in terms of what I think is missing from the curriculum. And I want to say this is not new. So after the Civil War, the Daughters of the Confederate, they went about and took control of the narrative about the Civil War. And part of that was they took control of the textbooks that went all over the country. And reframed the war and reframed slavery and what the war was about, right? And so now you hear people saying it's part of our heritage, the slaves weren't treated that poorly. So there's a gap in the curriculum in that even how slavery is discussed, the Civil War, what really the purpose of Reconstruction and why it didn't really happen and what was realized. Students are not being taught that in the curriculum. So even when it's laser focused on slavery and pieces of the civil rights movement, and it's told in a way that, that people were peaceful, but Martin Luther King was a rebel. He was a rebel, and he was not liked when he went away. So I would say, to answer your question, what do I think is missing from that? Because critical race theory is not taught in the K-12 schools at all, right? And the 1619 Project is about reframing American history in the context of slavery and the contributions that Black people have made. And, one research did a study of whites and asked them, what are your impression of Black Americans in the 1860s, 1870s? And they said, loyal, reliable, hard workers. Then they asked them, they resurveyed, white individuals in the South again in the 1880s and 1890s, and guess what they said? They're lazy, they're criminals, because they were free. They were free. And then the narrative changed. And so I think that happened. So what is missing from the K-12 curriculum is the truth, the full context of the truth, and what is the American story. And the American story is the African American, the Black story, and the Black history, and the Black contributions. I love that Michelle Obama said, who knew that I would be in a house that, slaves built? And people were upset about that, because you know why? Because the truth is not being told to kids in the curriculum.
And the truth isn't always pretty.
That's right.
It's not.
I think that's why with Governor DeSantis, he wants to maintain that the truth is not going to be told. And it's also that white supremacy ideology that we still want to oppress you and make you feel inferior because we want to be in control of wealth, power, economically, politically, socially. So they're maintaining that. And I can't believe in Florida they would go for that. And then when the AP board revamped, because he would not approve it, he banned it. And then when they revamped it, they took out Black Lives Matter. I brought my 1619 project. This is the children's version, because when I did begin in education, I began in the elementary schools. So you're right, it's just connecting Africa, our West African countries, with the Middle Passage, of course traveling, losing many Africans and going to America and creating another culture, surviving. And right, they thought the slaves were insane if they ran away. That was called drapetomania. And so there were many revolts because they were not happy. And because, as Afrocentricity said, if they are true African, they're going to challenge the system. And we are still challenging the system.
And I think it's interesting that we're touching on the 1619 Project, because it's one of my favorite books that I have ever read. I read it from cover. It took me just a few hours. I could not put it down. I was so just engrossed in the thing, because I remember growing up, again, in Texas, so do with that what you will, where we learned that slavery, or that the Civil War was not about slavery, that it was about states' rights. And I would never forget this. I went to my grandparents' house that summer. I think I was in maybe the 4th or 5th grade. And I went home to my grandparents' house, and both my grandparents were teachers. My grandfather was a history teacher. And I went home to their house, and I was telling them all about the stuff that I had learned over the past year. And I was like, well, yeah, Grandpa, we learned all about the Civil War and all this kind of stuff. And he was like, I remember he just kind of looked at me. He was like, well, what did you learn? And I was like, well, Grandpa, they told me this, and they told me, well, it was all about states' rights, and it was all about this, and he was silent. He didn't say one thing. He just left the room, and went and grabbed this book off of his bookshelf. And he handed me this huge book. It was this massive thing that I still have. It's this giant U.S. history book from, I have no idea when. The pages are all fallen out of it. And he was like, I want you to read this for me. And I started reading it, and he was just like, I want you to tell me what that says. And I was like, well, it says that the South was fighting for because they wanted to be able to keep the money that they were making and all this kind of stuff. And he was like, okay, well, how are they making their money? And I was like, well, I guess from the products they were growing. I don't know, from cotton or something. And he was just like, yeah. He was like, well, who were the people who were picking that cotton? And I was like, oh, wait a minute. And it blew my mind, but that was the complete antithesis of what we had learned in school. And it completely blew me away. And so especially now when you have like the 1619 Project, you have critical race theory, you have all these things coming out now. One of the big ones for me that has come out recently is Juneteenth, the popularity of Juneteenth. Because again, when I was growing up, Juneteenth was always a huge holiday. That's when people in Texas, we have our family reunions, we do big, huge celebrations, we have parades. For us, it's much bigger than Martin Luther King Jr. Day. It's because that was our true Independence Day, and it's always been celebrated as such my entire life. The thing I find interesting, though, is that now it's becoming more and more popular, and now other people are learning about it. What do you think about this almost a surge in knowledge, I guess, of Juneteenth? When did you guys become aware? I know as educators, you were probably aware before most other people were, but what do you think about this newfound almost popularity? Because now it's almost like you see Bath and Body Works will send you something saying Happy Juneteenth, and you're like, well, that's a little weird. It's almost become almost like this, I don't even know, like this marketing ploy instead of almost a pride thing.
Well, there's always some of that when you have events and things become national holidays. But I think it was the right thing to do, President Biden actually making this a national holiday by recognizing that this was the true, actual, freeing of the slaves. The last ones were months after the Civil War ends. They're just now hearing, like the last 200,000, that you've been free. Okay, so that really is the time where we can say, okay, this is where it officially ended, when people actually who were still fighting or were enslaved found out that this was that slavery had ended, at least formally. But now we get calls at the university to teach like AAA and other state agencies, which it's now mandatory that they learn about this history. The thing about history is, based on facts. You have to have evidence to support. And this is something that over the last few years, coming from the top, and I'm not going to back down on that, okay? From the most influential offices in our government here in the United States, not using facts, all right, or misinterpreting facts to perpetuate lies and myths. And so the fact that we are now saying, okay, this is a fact. We have evidence that supports this, and now we are going to include this as significant part of our history, not only validates what the experiences and the Black experience and things that people have gone through, but it reveals the truth. And that's what I was trying to say before. Okay, until we are ready to acknowledge as a country that these things actually happened and are contributing to the disparities that we see today, then we aren't ready to move forward. To say that we want social justice is a myth unless we are ready to look at the history and connect that to what is it actually happening right here, right now, before us. We thought that COVID-19 revealed a lot of those disparities, right? When you take a look at, well, who had access to vaccines, who had access to, were working in these jobs that we had to keep going, in the healthcare and tending to people who were in nursing homes or providing food, those kinds of things. The most heavily exposed were Black and brown people living in, concentrated areas where they were exposed to the virus and had suffered the heaviest casualties, suffered the greatest losses economically, physically, psychologically. All it did was reveal what already existed. So then we have to start asking ourselves the tough questions. Why? Right? So to me, to recognize the truth, like in Juneteenth, so that promotes understanding, so that promotes knowledge. That's how you move towards social justice. That's how you move towards equity.
So for me, I'm very happy that Biden signed for us to recognize, but I just saw it as a day off because I'm going to say why. I grew up, like I said, I grew up in a predominantly black neighborhood, and so Juneteenth has been part of my life. I grew up in Buffalo, New York. Buffalo is about 48% black. And so ever since I was a little kid, it was always Juneteenth, and it was the weekend. If it fell on a weekend, it was the weekend after Juneteenth. Sometimes it happened to be around Father's Day. A lot of black businesses would come out there. They had a lot of things for Family Day. And I felt like, if one of us is in slavery, we all still in slavery, right? And so that's what Juneteenth means to me is the day, I guess, when everyone was at least notified and free from slavery. And that was our day of freedom. That was the day that we recognized. And I'm not saying that we didn't, recognize the 4th of July, but it was just something uniquely special about Juneteenth. And it was also a celebration of our culture. So do I think it's important that, Biden has recognized it? Yes, I do. But I feel like it was part of the black culture, and everyone else is now catching up and learning about that. But then again, going back to the curriculum and what we're learning in school, they never talk. I'm old, but I don't think I'm that old. They didn't talk about Juneteenth in school. That wasn't something that was discussed in school. It was just like, oh, Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, and that's it. We're going to the next, subject.
Juneteenth, when Joe Biden signed and approved Juneteenth as a national holiday, I was happy because when I moved to Spokane celebrated Juneteenth. When I was at Atlanta University, they talked about the holiday. And when teaching at EWU, I always introduced to my students, this is Freedom Day because Frederick Douglass said, "What to the slave is the 4th of July?" Has anyone read or listened to him? I mean, that is so powerful, so in depth about the struggles, the violence of the institution of slavery. So I was happy that Joe Biden and Congress approved Juneteenth as a national holiday because many people didn't know about it. And also, I'm proud that they passed that anti-lynching bill. Imagine, when was it? Last year or 2 years ago? Last year? When have they been lynching black folk? How long have they been lynching black folk? We even have the Peace and Justice Museum dedicated to the many people who were lynched. Mississippi had the largest numbers. What I'm saying is it's about, I won't say damn because we have kids in here. It's about time. The anti-lynching. Now we need to pass the George Floyd, what is it, justice? I forget the name of it, but we need to pass that too because our black males are still being killed or beaten. So I was happy that it was a national holiday. It's like Dr. Martin Luther King. Some people think it is a day off, and if you've been used to the holiday, you just think it's another holiday because I've been introduced to it since I was a young child, but many people have not. They didn't even know Juneteenth. But anyway, I'm glad. I'm happy.
But I think you also have to recognize the fact, though, that we're having very different lived experiences.
Yes.
All right? And African Americans have to know, because it's a part of our experience, right, the Euro-American experience, that everybody is required to learn that, but not everybody is required to learn the African American experience. And African Americans have been here as long or longer. All right? My husband, the Schwindemans, came over to the United States from Switzerland during the largest wave of immigration from Europe, the 1880s, all right, to the 1920s. Okay, that time period, the end of the 19th century, the beginning of the 20th century. So, you know, my husband's his grandfather just passed away. Oh, it's been 10 years now. It's amazing. But anyway, so he was 97. And so my husband is only the fourth generation here in America. Okay? I have slaves on both sides of my family. So my family was here at least 100 years. I can't document any further than that because there's no records, right? But they've been here at least 100 years longer than my husband's family. Yet who was considered American and who wasn't? Who had rights immediately and who didn't? And until we understand this history, that's what I mean by institutionalized, racism, and that it was systemic. We had to have the 14th Amendment, which only came after the freeing of the slaves, right, to say birthright citizenship. Now, if you're born here, you are an American. And now we have people talking about getting rid of the 14th Amendment. Then what are you going to do to decide who is an American and who isn't? Now you're going back to the way it was, which was determined before on race. If you were white, you were an American. If you weren't, not until well into the 20th century could you become an American citizen if you were brown, okay? And that means not just black was the definition of that, right? But it included all people of color.
So now, I guess this is a perfect segue to talk about Florida and Governor DeSantis' comments on AP African American Studies, because it's very interesting, because exactly to your point, the AP, for anybody who doesn't know, the AP class, African American Studies, Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida decided, you know what, I don't like this test. I think all of these things in this test, they're completely unnecessary. Mm-hmm. The AP comes back and is like, you know what, great, we're going to take all of this stuff out of this test because you asked us. But then the funny part to me was they didn't tell anybody. They didn't ask anybody else's opinion on it, no nothing. They just went back, changed it all, and then resubmitted it as like their final submission. So now it just kind of stands. There's no changing it. What do you think about that? I just would love to know your professional opinions.
I had the opportunity to actually review the exam and everything, because I have to determine in terms of credits and transfers of credits for our program and department at the university how much this would transfer over, how much they're learning. And what the AP did was nothing short of astounding, okay? I looked at the curriculum, I looked what they were doing, what they included. This was something that took years. This was something that they had professors and scholars from universities all over the United States, colleges all over the United States, and even high schools all over the United States. So it wasn't limited to a certain area. They went through thousands and thousands of documents. It's very exhaustive, okay, and well documented, well organized, well constructed and written. So this is, and he had the nerve to say that it wasn't educational. It had no educational value. The fact is, what he knows and understands is that it has too much educational value, right? The way that, if you want to continue to control the narrative, right, and control what people want to believe is the truth, is to eliminate it. And that's what he's choosing to do. So what he's essentially trying to do, this is not out of ignorance. He knows and understands the power of the truth. Mm-hmm. Okay, the power of educating people, that it will never be the same when people know the truth. And so this is another, in my opinion, it's another step towards to keep white supremacy and those that ideology firmly in place. And that's exactly what they did at the beginning of the 20th century. This was called the Dunning School of Thought, which originated in colleges and universities, right, on the East Coast, that we're going to do a revision of the history, calling it the lost cause, rather than what everybody knew to be true, that the Civil War, was about slavery. Everybody knew that. All the documents, all the arguments in Congress, everything that was going on in our nation for years preceding that was all about the expansion of slavery versus trying to curtail it. And when it finally blew up, everybody knew that's what, with President Lincoln, because they thought he was going to end slavery. So 20 years later, right, people are saying, well, we want to reunite the people, the Northerners and the Southerners. It had nothing to do with African Americans and their contributions or their feelings and thoughts, right? We wanted to reunite, essentially what they were saying, are the white people. And how to do that? Well, you don't want to make anybody look like the bad guy. So they had a good cause. It was the lost cause. And then the other one was for slavery. And that kind of smoothed things over, but it was far from the truth.
So I definitely agree with what Angela said in terms of not wanting the truth to be revealed and upholding white nationalism and white supremacy. But I kind of think it's even more insidious than that. So it is an effort that we continue to not to know ourselves. We have a unique experience in this country in that little is known about our heritage and actually where we come. Like, we know we come from West Africa, but our actual story, our history, and we were stripped of our language, our religion, our customs, families were torn apart. And so I think this is not only an effort for white children not to understand the full context and contributions and humanity of black people, but I also think they don't want us to know and learn our history, because who's more likely to take AP African American classes? My son is taking, because he wants to learn more about African American history, he's taking an African American history course, and he mostly is surrounded by people that look like him. So all the things that Angela said, but also, you don't want us to know about ourselves. You don't want us to learn our history and who we are. And it's kind of like, can we all just be American? I think it's a lot more insidious than just not having white children learn. I think they don't want us to know and to know ourselves, right? To know yourself. I don't think they want that.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. But also, we don't know, I'm talking as a nation, how pervasive this African culture is in our culture today. You understand what I'm saying?
Point. That's my point.
That's African, okay? The English said yay and nay. You don't see anybody in America going around saying yay and nay, but we're saying that's African. The other thing that's African is the banjo. That got appropriated as well. You do not see black people playing the banjo, but that came from Africa. So many of the things that came from Africa, rice, from the Mende people in Sierra Leone, all right? They started planting it for themselves on the South Carolina and Georgia coast, and then the planters realized, hey, this can be a very profitable cash crop, and started forcing. We don't know ourselves what we have brought, and this is the things that you learn when you learn about African American culture and history.
Thank you.
When you say rice, don't forget cotton. We made United States an international country.
That's how we became wealthy.
That's right.
Don't forget
how
jazz,
we became wealthy.
all the contributions.
Right. And then when we look at what's being taught in our schools, as my colleague said, society doesn't want us to know ourselves. Look at the curriculum in these schools. Dr. Martin Luther King, Harriet Tubman, Rosa Parks. They don't go into depth about Frederick Douglass, Ida B. Wells, the Black Panthers. Most of my students, they view the Black Panthers as a violent group. So you have to introduce them to the history of the Black Panthers. What about the Harlem Renaissance? They don't know anything about the Harlem Renaissance. Billie Holiday, Duke Ellington, their original, where the blues and jazz originated. And of course, we know that's originated in Africa too.
And to add on to the Black Panthers, there's a reason why we have school lunch and breakfast programs today.
Yeah,
their
absolutely.
community service actually got absorbed by public school districts,
right.
all right? That because they were feeding their kids. Okay, and they said these kids can't go to school hungry, so many of those social programs, the after-school programs and things that they started, actually got absorbed into the public education system.
Right. And we look at Fred Hampton when, I don't know if you saw the movie, what is it, The Messiah.
The Messiah.
How
Black
they burned
Messiah.
the Black Messiah, how the government burned the levels where they were housing the food, the cereal for the kids. And the government said they were recruiting them for the Black Panthers. What they were doing is taking care of their community, not only protecting but feeding their community. So today, is it the WIC program we have? Yes. And then I want to go into, when you look at the civil rights movement, you know Dr. King was a leader, but there were also other people. A. Philip Randolph, who was into the Union, who went to President Roosevelt and told him we would march on Washington. Prior to 1963, this was in the 40s, if, number one, you didn't desegregate, well, that was under Truman, but with Roosevelt, he was saying, eliminate the discrimination in the government jobs. So he approved this executive order. And then under Truman, that's when A. Philip Randolph said, we will march on Washington if you don't desegregate the military. So, you know, these are very important events in our history our kids do not learn. They don't know that Shirley Chisholm was the first African-American female who ran for president. They don't know that. So when I'm saying we are progressing, but there's so much more to do with our curriculum because Black history, African-American history should be a part of that curriculum. And it should be taught all year within the schools, but we have a long way to go.
And you know, we don't have a democracy without Black history, okay? I mean, here you have the Founding Fathers writing in the Declaration of Independence about inalienable rights and people, all men being created equal. And they saw that only for themselves. And it didn't include women, and it didn't include people of color. African Americans were the first to say that represents us as well, okay, and to act on that. So if we don't understand that, then the realization of that document and of this concept of freedom and liberalism, right, that civic equality, things that even in 1903 when Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois was saying three things that we needed: civic equality, education, right, and for according to your ability, right, and what's the third one now? I can't think of it'll come to me. All right, but the right to vote.
Yeah.
Okay, these things, they were considered radical in 1903. How radical are they now? It's not radical, right? So the point is to say that African American history doesn't have, a part in our curriculum, that it's not educational. You don't have America without it. You don't understand the civil rights movement. You don't understand Black Lives Matter unless you understand why, you have a group of people who were marginalized and exploited from the very onset. This is historical. No other people on the face of this earth have achieved and accomplished what has been accomplished here in America, especially in the 1960s, without, in a nonviolent manner. But that's believing in this system of democracy and actually using the system to be able to achieve that goal. Nowhere else in the world has that been done. Why wouldn't we want to teach that and to know that in our classrooms?
I just want to say really quickly that the 1619 Project is about exposing the fact that America has never been a democracy. It has never been a place where everyone was welcome to vote. People had to fight And when you look at, when Angela asked the question, why wouldn't you want to teach this history? But that's the point. They don't want to teach the history. That white supremacy, white nationalism attacks the political infrastructure, the educational, the legal infrastructure, where they are taking back rights. The Supreme Court just recently heard a case about the sovereignty of Native Americans. Wasn't that settled law, right? They're rolling things back. So education is a big part of maintaining white supremacy. And the 1619 Project talked about the fact that there are people in this country that believe certain people should have more power, more wealth, more education, just more everything. And that is their fundamental belief. And part of that is to control what we know, right? And control the history and what we know. So I just wanted to make that comment that it's purposeful. So even though it makes sense to us, it's a strategy that is happening. And this is not the first time. It's not the first time that they've attacked DEI. It's not the first time the Supreme Court just heard about affirmative action in admissions, college admissions. So what does that mean? We can't even use race as a factor. It looks like that's where it's going. And statistics have shown when you remove that, the number of minorities that are going to college, it goes way down. And so, we're facing a battle on multiple fronts, and this is one front, but there are multiple fronts on which we're facing it. And so if you dehumanize people and make it seem like they've made no contributions, they lack dignity because they were just slaves or whatever else, then you're able to not only not remember the past, but repeat the past. And that's what I think all of this is about.
So now, just to kind of wrap things up on a more positive note, I want to know, what would your hope be for the future? What would you like a Black History Month panel to be talking about 10, 20, even 50 years from now? Or what things, maybe the better question is, what would you like them to not have to talk about then?
Police brutality.
Yes. And also our children should know a Black national anthem and their history of the Black national anthem with James Weldon Johnson. I would like to see like a time capsule that we put in what's happening today, what we are dealing with, and then see maybe 20 years from now, and see what our children are dealing with. Not only children, what we are dealing with in 20 years from now, 20, 30 years from now. Yeah. Hopefully we're not talking about the same thing like police brutality. I'm sorry.
That's number one. I think, the killing of, Black people by the police, but in general, I love that you brought up the lynching, the anti-lynching law. More Blacks were lynched after they were freed from slavery, in reality, thinking about that. But, if I had a magic wand, I would think that we're not talking about Black history as this siloed, finite body of knowledge that is part of the history, that it really is the history, American history, and part of this country, and that we're thinking of ways to, I guess, to eliminate some of the inequities, getting rid of, women dying in childbirth and things like that, that we're trying to solve more complex and complicated issues rather than like talking about why won't they tell the truth and why we can't have, you know what I mean? Like, just like, can we solve some more complex issues that are facing the Black community and to be able to talk more about that?
I think we're in a critical juncture in our nation right now, which is part of the problems that, what we're seeing in higher education is the need to be able to educate people from a very different demographic than we have in the past. The browning of America, meaning within the next 20 to 30 years, it's already started, right? The majority of our children are going to be brown. These are the people who have been excluded from, historically speaking, from higher education or discouraged from higher education. Who is going to be running the economy? Who are going to be, the jobs, the infrastructure? If we continue to marginalize groups, these children of color from higher education, if these are going to be our leaders, if this is going to be the majority population, we have a huge problem. So not only are we playing catch up with this education that we need to know a knowledge of ourselves, but the very problems that we're having right now, when you talk about immigration and these laws that we have, but our refusal to deal with it, when I look at that, what I see is the same problems that we had during slavery, where we had a tiered system initially, right? Where you had the enslaved, and then you had the half-free, and then you had the free. And there was very little mobility, all right? We're looking at that in terms of people who are documented, undocumented, documented, right? And then people who have become citizens. We created that, okay? That replaced the enslaved, the half-free, which could vacillate back and forth. They could pull you back into slavery if they could use it, kind of like you're in the military and you have to go back. And then the ones that were fully free. So we, by our refusal to deal with these social problems, which are things that we have created because we have kept these things in place to decrease the amount of social mobility and access that people have to things. We have to be able to deal with these kinds of issues. This is America, all right? And we have more children of color now than we ever have, and that's not going to turn around, okay? So not only are we looking at facing and dealing with our history, but we're also looking at the problems that we are dealing with today as a result and consequence of that history. That's, the labor force picking our crops and stuff like that. Well, that's what happened after slavery ended, and we had to open up the border because they thought white people were going to go out and pick the crops, and that sure as heck didn't happen. Right? So these problems that we have to be willing to face. And of course, the whole thing with the police brutality was part and parcel. That violence escalated after slavery ended. If you were beating and whipping and killing your slaves, you wouldn't have an industry, right? Because you needed their bodies. Once they were no longer belonging to you, right? Either you had to force them back into that system, which they did by changing the laws and making it very easy to criminalize black and brown bodies, and also easily to replace them or destroy them. Okay, so we're still dealing with those effects, and I'm hoping in another 20 years that we're much further down the road than we are right now.
You want to say something, Dr. Bain?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a statement about our college students. Our dropout rate is high. From the college level, we have 35-40% graduating. Many of the students who are graduating are females. They have to deal, of course, with the cost of education. They have to deal with some of the implicit biases and discrimination that occurs on the college level, and of course, the lack of diverse faculty. Eastern has created a peer, its pro-equity, anti-racism committee to try to eliminate some of those inequities. So they're dealing with that today, so I'm hoping in the future that there will be more resources for our students of color to stay in school and to also be welcome in the classes by diverse faculty and staff. And Angela is the first African American female to be recognized or approved as assistant dean at Eastern Washington University. The first. Wow. We have a long way to go.
Well, ladies, just thank you so much for having this very open and honest conversation with us all. I appreciate you all very much for that. And I want to thank all of you for coming out today, of course, and for everyone with the City of Spokane, Councilwoman Betsy Wilkerson, for Mark for asking me to do this, and of course my KREM family as well for coming out today and spending your Saturday with us, and the Spokane Public Library, of course, as well, for just being phenomenal, and all of the vendors, the people who came up here today. It's just been a fantastic event. Thank you all again, and have a great Saturday, everyone.